here with my good friend Lisa Gezon, professor of anthropology here at UWG, and I wanted to talk a little bit today about drugs, and one drug in particular to start with. It's called khat. Tell us a little bit more about that and how you got involved in it.
Yeah, khat is a drug that's chewed, and when people chew it, they get a big bulge on the side of their cheek. And it's people might know it from Somalia and Yemen. It's really a big drug in Somalia and Yemen. In fact, it's been tied with the pirates and the terrorists of Somalia and this kind of thing. And the Yemeni dock workers actually brought it over to Madagascar with them in the early 1900s. And they started planting it. First, it was just the Yemenis using it. And then it kind of started becoming more popular in Madagascar, like particularly in the 80s and the 90s. And when I was there studying it in the early 2000s, it was really just starting to take over. A lot of other social groups were chewing it as well. So you had the laborers chewing it for energy because it's a mild amphetamine. It's kind of like drinking a strong cup of coffee. So you had laborers, you had people just chewing it for fun to sort of pass the afternoon, particularly young men. And, anyway, those are the kind of people who were chewing it, either just for leisure to hang out with friends or to kind of keep them awake at work, like we drink coffee.
How long were you in Madagascar studying that?
Well, okay, so I started studying in Madagascar actually my first trip there was in 1990, my first year of graduate school. And then I did my dissertation research on conservation issues and deforestation. And one of the things that got me interested in khat is people were growing khat outside of a protected area, and there was allegations of khat taking over the forest and also of replacing food crops. So there was a sort of panic about khat, and I thought, well, I need to investigate this because it's part of conservation. And then I just became interested in khat and then drugs and society more holistically to begin with.
So what, I mean, that's all fascinating. What did you find anything out while you were investigating khat that was unanticipated, or was a bit of a surprise, or what area interested you the most about it?
The thing that interested me the most, I would say, is the social perceptions of it and how varied they were. So khat itself is a relatively mild drug. It's like drinking strong coffee. So it's not one of those kind of drugs that you're likely to OD on,
That's not psychoactive or anything, right?
Well, it's psychoactive in the sense that it changes your mood and behavior, but it's just very mildly so. And that's the thing, when we think about drugs, there are a lot of drug scholars will say even things that we don't think of as being drugs are technically drugs in the sense that they change mood and behavior. Things like, well, we don't obviously know coffee and caffeine, but even things like sugar and chocolate, those kind of things, we know that sugar makes people hyperactive. So I guess, mood and behavior.
Right. Since
the drug itself is kind of mild, you find that there's a big canvas for people's imaginations about it. And so it becomes this canvas on which people mark themselves socially as being an in-group or an out-group kind of person. If you chew it, you feel one way about it. If you don't chew it, you feel dramatically different about it. So if you chew it, then you like it. You even love it. You pursue it. You know all the different varieties. It's part of your life. It's part of your culture. It's part of your friends and your friendships. But if you don't like it, then you think it's this next scourge, and you think it's going to destroy society, and you think that it makes people lazy, and you think it needs to be outlawed. And it takes on this tremendous moral panic, not unlike, somewhat reminiscent of reefer madness in the 40s and 50s, and just these crazy scares that we know whatever the risks and dangers are, we know that they were dramatically out of proportion with the effects that we actually see. So you get that with khat. And what happens is you see this difference between like the traditional kind of indigenous local people, probably a lower level of education, contrasting with people who maybe have a higher education, who are from a different part of the island, who are in higher socioeconomic status, more highly educated, and they're the ones who are very, very worried about it.
Huh, interesting.
And you
Yeah.
find this all anywhere you find khat, you're going to
Yeah.
find the same thing. And I have a good colleague who studies it in East Africa, and it's the same thing. Throughout the world, there's all these legalization conversations about khat that revolve around some people just panicking about its horrendous effects. And other people are like, what's the big deal? You drink coffee, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy. It's crazy, like the dramatic difference in perception that you get.
Well, it's funny. I meant to ask you. As you were talking, I'm like, I'd love to ask you about, like, so we don't really have a cot issue here. I've never even heard of it before you talked about it. But I'm sure there are ways in which those sorts of issues and arguments are happening here too. But it's almost like you've set it up already, right? The legalizing of drugs happening in the United States right now is somewhat akin to this, right? This idea that we're changing perceptions of what we think of drugs being and doing.
Yeah, it's very similar to that. Drugs are these really complex substances that are very chemically real. Yeah. And just because khat and some other drugs may not be as chemically powerful as people ascribe them to, as people think they are, some drugs really are. Some drugs are going to land you in the emergency room. Some drugs you're going to get seriously addicted to. So drugs are incredibly complex to study from a social science perspective. And one of the things that we look at is we look at people's relationships with drugs, not so much substances themselves. We say the substances themselves, there's a fairly controversial statement that there are no bad substances, but there are bad ways of using them. Huh. Now, it could be controversial. You might say, okay, fentanyl, I'm not sure I'm going to agree with you on that one. But let's just say in general, it's the way people use things. So what we look at from a social science perspective is what is people's relationship with these drugs? Are there some social and cultural limits around the way people use them? Usually people have healthier relationships with drugs when they're in settings that are socially controlled, where there are some rules about how much you take, what you take it with, any kind of food or other drink, sure, where you take it with friends. And so, drinking wine around a dinner table is really different from, binge drinking alcohol in a society that has no familiarity and no historical context of drinking a lot of alcohol. Yeah, so you say that find the same drink can have really different effects in really different communities and really different individuals.
I love that. I mean, I think it's so much of what we do in the academy and the university, right? We take issues that people want to polarize and simplify, and it's always about complicating and nuance, right? And that's kind of like across disciplines. That's what we're always saying. Like, wait a minute, it's not that easy.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So I would say with current drug conversations, is people really need to look and try to avoid moral panic, and try to ask very real questions about what kind of relationships people have with these substances, and not look just at the chemical itself. It's naive and a fallacy to look at the chemical itself and expect that to determine its social effects on people. It needs to be looked at in a broader context.
Well, let's go meet for a cup of coffee and discuss this more.
I love it.
We'll end here.
Yeah, right. Coffee. Yeah, we'll end with some drugs. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Lisa. I appreciate it.
All right. Bye.